So delighted to welcome each of you to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored by Still and Moving Center. And today, the topic that we're taking up is the eager student, to be followed next week by the willing teacher. We feel exceptionally honored to have speaking for us today, Fariba Enteshari, who is really a really not just foremost, but very, very deep expert and follower of Rumi. And she's someone who has devoted decades of her life to not only studying, but also instantiating the teachings that Rumi provided over 800 years ago to us. And I would definitely call Fariba an eager student, as well as a beautiful teacher in her own right. I want to turn it over immediately to Fariba to take up this topic of the eager student in relationship to Rumi and his teacher, Shams, from the Sufi tradition. Fariba?
Thank you, Renee, for the opportunity to meet wonderful souls and people who are on the same wavelength and are eager to tap into Asian studies and wisdom from different traditions. It's just there's no place better than being with you and explore the traditions that help us to not only understand ourselves, but also the world, the complex world we live in today. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm glad you called me eager students. I would call myself lazy students, but sometimes even the laziest student will be, they are fortunate to find a teacher that can open the doors that otherwise we would not be able to open for ourselves. So a teacher is a person who knows the fibers of our hearts and can lead us through those windows that light can shine through. And I start with my own story. I grew up in a family, secular family, that were probably not interested in everything I was interested in. I was a hermit child. I loved reading, but not necessarily partying, and being in a household that you couldn't learn the names of the guests that would come through the household. It was impossible to learn. There was too many people coming and going. And it was, as a child, it was a really interesting way to grow up, because a lot of people were super interesting, but also not very matching to the nature I had. Iran Revolution started. I went to Germany. The war happened. I was just 18 years old. The difficulties out of the proportion that parents or life could prepare me came on my way. And the desire to understand, what is this world we live in? What does it all mean? Became somewhere within my being, just widening and widening and widening. And anything that could take the attention of a 18 years old, 19 years old, or throughout my 20s was not appealing to me. But what was appealing to me is, how can we understand all this complexity and perplexity around us? As a young person, I didn't have much tools. And except for the readings, I have nowhere else to go. unfortunately, and I say it for a reason, unfortunately, at that time, I was a chemist, biochemist, molecular biologist. I think I bombarded myself with complex things to just kind of forget about the life I was living in. But one day I went to library and I needed a book, so I went to bookstore. And this was the shelves for chemistry books. And I was looking for something to make it easier for me. And here was literature and a green book, just like a magnet, would take my hand and my hand would go toward the green book. And I'm like, no, 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 it's 23 Denmarks, it's too much. I need a chemistry book. And my hands, again. Finally, I bought the book. And it's one of the only books I brought it in. It was a book of someone in a German soldier in a Second World War that was dying within these cells, ruined cells, bombarded, and find a piece of paper of Rumi's poetry. And that opened him up. And later on, actually rescued his life. He came to Germany, he became a poet, and he was writing poetries. And he became a meditative person. So he was teaching in this book his meditation, actually. So I called Iran and say, send me Rumi book. And they did. Rumi was banned when I grew up in Iran because he is universal and all-embracing. And what church or organized religion wanted you to have that? So he was banned for different reasons, but he was banned. But I knew of him a bit because I was really into books. And I think at that time when they sent me the book, I passionately wanted to start it and learn what this Rumi has to say. And the script was Farsi, but I didn't understand a word. It's an 800 years form of speaking and poetry. And I think I put the desire in my heart that I need a teacher. Fast forward 12 years later, I came to United States, quite a mystical journey, because it was not possible for Iranians who are single to be able to, travel to United States, Iran and United States. Even you go back 40 years ago to the time of hostages, didn't have good relationship. It was a ban on Iranian to come here, especially without any reason. And I got a visa based on listening to this inner guidance I had, which I didn't understand it as a biochemist or molecular biologist. I really didn't understand it, but I was smart enough to test. So I said, okay, let's go to the embassy and see if I get a visa. So I got a visa. I came here. It was a mystical journey within a mystical journey within a mystical journey. And within that, I became a scholar at USC, University of Southern California, because I wanted time out of lab to read. And they would give a scholarship to a scientist that can speak German. And that led me to Hafiz and Rumi. And then I met my Rumi teacher who passed away actually last week. And his memorial was just right before this talk. So I think it took years to build up a desire and a pure intention of wanting to expand. Almost like my heart should have wings, which Rumi talks about it, a wing of love and a wing of knowledge. And I was younger then. I was just hungry and thirsty for knowledge. Mm. So the thirst within the mystical journey and Rumi's poetry is a measurement of how we don't deviate from our path of enlightenment. And once I was at USC, one of the speakers that came to Iranian professors and scholars meeting was Dr. Parviz Sahabi, my teacher who passed away last week. And I always, from my childhood, was very interested in an international education that teaches us a common language. And when Dr. Sahabi was talking to us, he was talking about this universal love that Rumi talks about 800 years ago. And I was mesmerized. How can someone 800 years ago talk about the school of truth and love? And nobody pay attention. I was an expert in a number of things, and I was doing, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century of German literature. And of course, madly in love with Schiller and Goethe. I never heard somebody talking about a language and education that is universal love. I said, this is what I was looking for. So the rest was simple. He sent after me to study with him, and I started study with him for 8 years. He taught us Masnavi, the book of enlightenment, the book of steps by step to dive within and see the presence of God within your own heart. And just experiencing, after 12 years of going through war, not knowing where my parents were, because they lived right by the border of Iraq and Iran, years of illness, years of confusion, my body just became a magnet to teachings of Rumi. And I see it as a privilege to be able to draw into my life a teacher who had 90 years of studying with 3 scholars who each study from a different point of view, 30 years. And then they were passed on to Dr. Sahabi, which passed it on to us. And that was just something that you couldn't plan. I didn't plan to become my vocation. English is my third language, and I have a very shy personality, so there was no way I wanted to speak in English in any form, especially literature, maybe German, maybe something else, but not English. It's an unruly language, does whatever it wants. But here was the path opening up. So going back to the book of Masnavi, which I studied with Dr. Fariba Sahabi. The book of Masnavi came to an existence because Rumi met Shams. And our time doesn't do any justice about talking about their relationship. And my background is strong in science. So I read the stories that you send us, and I like them, and I have seen many versions of them. In Turkey, you have set of versions. In Afghanistan, you have another set. Some through translation, you have another set of these, stories. I really don't pay attention to them. Where I find a home for what Shams was to Rumi is Masnavi, is the ladder, is the rung by rung, explaining what are the steps, pelle pelle ta mulaqat khuda, step by step to meet God within. That's how Rumi describes Masnavi. And then this is 30,000 verses. Rumi, as a teacher, put these in a very nice steps by steps. Come, I take your hand and teach you about your own soul journey. So it's poetry. It goes in you, it becomes you. It does what you need. It's just what you thirst for, what you long for. So the rest of the 40,000 verses, Rumi calls Divan Shams, which is the name of his teacher. He doesn't even call it after himself. He signs them as Khamush, which means silence. between Shams is beaming through. And there where I believe in such an expansion of heart and such a unity with someone who pours knowledge and pass on knowledge to you. So the rest he called Divan Shams. The Masnavi, he called it steps to the enlightenment. And what happened? What happened to Rumi? I can briefly tell us that Rumi was a perfect cellist. He was a clear, pure cellist. Why? Years of practicing. He even, grew up in a household that the walls of the household would mention the name of God. He grew up in such a chalice, and he kept it. Prolonged meditation, fasting, prayers. He was not a person who did not pay attention. His father was half mystical knowledge, half Sharia law. So he knew his way around the Sharia, the way of Islam, teaches the Islamic law, and also the way that connects our heart to the source, to Allah. So he was familiar with all of that. From his childhood, his teacher was the best disciple of his father. He was always adored. He was always put on pedestal. And Shams, compared to him, was a hidden sun within the complexity and the storm of this life. He wasn't such an obvious, person that you would bow to. There are saying that Rumi, they would, even the king would come and help him to sit on his horse every morning. So it was like an adoration out of love because of his knowledge and the way he was. So Shams comes, and at first he knows, he has seen him in Damascus before. He can feel what a chalice he can be for the knowledge that Shams knew, which are the more mystical and direct connection to the sun of enlightenment, to the wisdom, to the knowing. So he had different type of knowing. He doesn't have, from his childhood, he was an odd child. He was odd Perry. In interviews I have been asked, he was a wild card. I don't like to use that word, but he was pretty wild. Renee and I had a talk about today, and I said, he would tell many people who wanted to study with him, Shams, you don't even deserve my presence. Go away. I'm not going to teach you anything. The disciples of Rumi would come and sit because they were missing Rumi, not Shams. They did not like Shams because they didn't have the understanding who Shams was. And he wouldn't say anything. And Rumi wouldn't say anything because Shams is sitting there. So they had a silence kind of conversation and visit because Rumi respects so much Shams that wouldn't say anything in front of Shams. And Shams wouldn't say anything because they didn't deserve for him to say anything. So it kind of some of the writing and things that are passed on through his son is really comic when you read it today. Anyhow, Shams was for sure beyond this world and had ability, paranormal ability. And Rumi was not only a pure chalice of divine and prayers and God flowing through, but also very structured. His ego was a structure based on being worshipped by everyone. And Shams had to just pound some cracks in those walls and there is a story of wall in the Masnavi. So he had to crack those walls. But if Rumi wasn't thirsty, he wouldn't stay there. He would run away as fast as he could. So in a state, he just became like a phoenix, ashes into the form he was. And he became this master teacher and poet that has the freedom to play the divine. And we are we are benefiting today from all these sort of some version of these reports and stories that we hear, because we see the result in Masnavi and Divan Shams. We see what happened with the years of longing when someone suddenly, the passion is like inside and suddenly it opens up and have wings of the knowledge and knowing and wings of love. One thing I wanted to mention is it's all about love. Rumi tell us in Masnavi, the second book, the beginning of the second book. پرسید یکی که عاشقی چیست؟ گفتم که شما شوی بدانی. Once you really leave the border of being I, the ego, I, my city, I, my country, I, and understand the collectivity of all of us, all the being together, then you know love. Once you understand it's not you and I, there is no separation. And all of these poetry, the 60,000 verses, which Rumi wrote, he was 40 years old when he started becoming this passionate poet. He had years of studying and knowledge and wisdom under his belt. Too structured, probably. So the shake-up was Shams. And that's how the eager student became the chalice of being like a planet. Ironically, the name of Shams in Arabic is sun, S-U-N. So Rumi became the one who took the rays of knowledge of Shams, reflected into these passionate poetry pouring out of his heart. And the student wrote it down. And here we are having, like, you know, those people who run on the hot coals and fire. We can use them like that. You know, if you get numb, you have to run over some of these verses because it puts you on fire. It gives you some passion. It becomes the engine of your motivation and who you are. And it doesn't have any hopelessness in it. I know we live in a difficult time. It's slowly becoming as difficult as Rumi's time, where Mongol was attacking from one side and Crusader from another side, and it was sandwiched in between it after years of war. So Rumi said there is no hopelessness. And why should it be? There should be hopelessness if we practice the school of truth and love, which Shams pass on to Rumi. I will open it up soon to some your questions and your experiences. A verse that came in today, از وی ار سایه نشانی می‌دهد شمس هر دم نور جانی می‌دهد. So it's like the shadows are shimmering through some part of the truth. You know, if you are eager student, you can catch those glimpses because Shams, the sun, is there, and every moment Shams can give light to your being. So that's one of the verses of Masnavi, fairly at the beginning of Masnavi. For those of you who like essential Rumi, some of the verses that is translated by Coleman Barr say, look through Sham's eyes into the water that is entirely jewels, Jewels. I love this one. Start walking toward Shams. Your legs will get heavy and tired. Then comes a moment of feeling the wings you have grown, lifting. And this one is, I thought, is kind of complex but nice. The river water moving in all rivers at once. The truth that lives in Shams' space. You live where Shams lives because your heart donkey was strong enough to take you there. So the path had some conditions for the eager students. You live where Shams lives because your heart donkey was strong enough to take you there. I will close with the wording of Rumi talking about Shams and how he felt when he met Shams. And then we open up to your experiences and questions. When I encountered Shams, I realized that he knew the secret and desires of my heart. He created a storm within me and could answer my questions. Until then, I had been a carefree person and the most respected scholar in the city. People kissed my hand and paid homage to me. In every meeting or gathering, I was placed at the head above everyone else. My teachings were nourishment for the souls of my people. But Shams changed all of that. He guided me to the path of love, and I learned the truth in his school. I ravaged by love and became strong. I became a slave to love and became free. The divine ecstasy in love, which is an attribute of God, led me to the truth. Every moment that I was with Shams, my soul was in a state of adoration, and I was in touch with the Supreme Soul. I could clearly see the seed of creation. Thank you.
Mahalo, Fariba. And thank you so much for being here on this day when you could have been in person, honoring your teacher of so long. And you chose instead, you said, to honor Rumi by speaking about him and telling his story, which is in turn honoring your teacher. And really, really appreciate that you've done that on our behalf. And want to ask you and others about this idea that you mentioned of thirst, that eager student. And I looked up the word eager. It comes from a Latin word that means sharp or keen. And it's the same root word that would be behind the word vinegar, even. So like that thirst, that desire for understanding, for learning, does seem to have a lot to do with being an eager student who is ready to learn. And I just wonder about other people's experience with that kind of soul longing or for understanding that you described so well at the beginning of your own life, this complex, perplexing world that you are living in. What does it all mean? You wanted to know so much.
Yeah, nobody could teach me. I mean, it was beautiful that he was, I got a teacher who was sharp, clear, and whippy like Shams in many ways, but also insightful to call me tabla rosa, the blank paper. And I think that's what the thirst can create within us. I mean, I didn't think about it all these years, but today, especially as you mentioned, it takes a certain thirst to become a blank paper and ready to sponge in.
Can I ask a question? Okay. I was thinking that the Shams was almost, it's from your presentation, was almost too subtle to be clearly comprehended. And yet Rumi had the vehicle to do that, to transmit. And sometimes people will say the teacher is within, and that's definitely philosophical and psychologically profound, for sure. But there's nothing more beautiful to me to hear about somebody talking about their teacher. Nothing. And for a student who has their heart just open in adoration for their teacher, there's just nothing more moving. And that student thinks about their teacher in so many ways, almost 24/7, 365 in a way,
Yeah.
in some kind of a way. They think about where the teacher lives, how they live, the things that they say, their favorite phrases, and so forth. And there's this basking in the light. Anyway, I was just wondering if you could talk, well, you've been talking about it all along. And obviously that, I mean, apparently that must be part of the eager student, but to me, there's just nothing more beautiful.
I open up with talking about the teacher being a window to something we cannot open up ourselves. I mean, those moments of growing wings and suddenly being able to be lifted up and fly, I think they are the most, I think romantic love is overrated in some level. This is the essence of life. I went through it even through my dissertation and doctoral degree with one professor that I always felt through the gates that she had opened up for herself and others, I have been lifting up. And something you mentioned about the within us, Rumi talks about it. Rumi talks to us about it because he knows, he learned it from Shams, but he's passing it on because there were eager students like Hussam who asked him, his best disciple, I mean, how did you get where you get? Could you teach us? That's why we have Masnavi. That's because of one of the disciples of Rumi that begged him that he will do all the responsibilities Rumi has, but he will do everything for him to teach how he learned what he learned. Where is he? And this is Rumi's answer. I'm the midwife. The knowledge is already within you. I'm just knocking at the door. And I'm fortunate to have another teacher, which is still alive, that always slap on my wrist and say, no more knowledge, you know, is all there. Just let it shine through. And for us, this is what Rumi left behind. That is good to acquire knowledge, but it also is good to relax, to give birth to reason that we came in, to the service, to the vocation we need to do. And that needs contemplation. And I think I have seen it in my own life. It's not really possible if we don't lean into saying and talking of the same wavelength, even if it's in a form of meditation. Nothing is more beautiful than having those heart opening and feeling the wings of your heart when you are in presence of someone who can see clearly your longing and your desire. And for sure, good teachers do that. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
I was just reminded of an experience I had when I was in my 20s in Santa Cruz. A man named Rashad Field came to give a talk. He's the author of a book, The Last Barrier, which had a very profound effect on me. But just a short one lecture, and it was just something it wasn't the lecture. It was, I came early to the lecture, and he sprang out of the bushes. I don't know what he was meditating by himself in the bushes, and he came up, and all he did was walk up to me, and he looked me in the eyes. I'd never, of course, seen him before. And he just said, "I'm so glad you're here." And just that power of that moment is a moment that, anyway, I've never forgotten. And during his lecture, I just cried the whole time. I was cried. And before he left, there were many other people there. He went over to me and he said, "You think too much." And anyway, it was over. And then I've gone on to do, I didn't pursue anything with that, but over the years, I went on to study yoga, actually, in an entirely different way. But anyway, I think that's just my connection with when I've heard Rumi. It's just reminded me of something about that knocking at the door.
Knocking at the door.
So beautiful. David.
Fariba, thank you, as always. Every time you offer here in our circle, I always think I should really be a student of yours, and certainly of Rumi. So I think you really represent the teacher that you're speaking of so beautifully. One thing that you shared was the green book, and it really spoke to me about an encounter that I had, completely different book called Power versus Force. But when I walked into the bookstore, it's almost like from the back of the bookstore, it was illuminated, that it drew me to the book. And I had a look at the book, did not buy it, and then went to dinner with my friend. We were just killing time. And then at the end of dinner, he reaches down and he pulls out the book, and he had bought it for me without even knowing that I had been drawn to the book. So I was magically drawn to the book, and I really, really appreciate your sharing that story. It lived for me, that experience. I did have a question, if you could indulge me, in the 40,000 verses, or 40,000 steps, if you will. Can you tell me what the first step is?
That's a very good. Listening, I believe. It's Rumi is big in creating the ability of listening. Also, what we talk about, because Rumi took the stages of enlightenment. We call it Hafshahre Eshq, 7 cities of love. These are the stages that he took from Attar. Evidently, Attar saw him when he was 14 years old, and he was walking behind. Attar, by the way, for those who don't know, it's another mystic poet. When Rumi was 14 years old, was walking behind his dad, and Attar told his student, there is an ocean walking behind a pool. So he knew of the mystical abilities of Rumi, could see it, and gifted Rumi with the book of, one of the books of Attar, The Journey of the Birds, The Comforts of Birds. And these birds are representative of us, and they're going through difficulties. And like ourselves, there are 30 of the birds, each of them are different. For example, the nightingale is a lover and loves to sing, and is the first bird that drop out of the journey, because he loves to sing and play. But at the end, the mixture of all these birds and the paths they took gets to the highest mountain in the heaven. And that's the essence of who we are. And the stages they go through, it called Hafshahre Eshq, which is the 7 cities of love. And the first stage is the thirst. We call it talab, which means the desire to know. And Rumi is very big in mentioning that if you don't want it to know, there is no teacher, including Rumi, that can teach you. So he has written for the first stage of enlightenment, nothing. The second stage is love, and is the first book of Masnavi. And Masnavi is around 26,000 verses. Doesn't matter, some people say 30, but it's roughly around 26,000 verses in 6 books, not 7 books. Because he didn't write anything about, go figure out, go become thirsty. I love, my enlightened teacher talks a lot about well of being, like we are a well. And the ability to go deeper and deeper has a lot to do with your well, has the ability and a deep container to become, we create what, it's a very good example that Renee talked about. I usually don't talk about myself, but it's really important to say all the hardship I went through in my 20s, and then the strange way that I came to United States, they created a really deep enough well to desire for teachers to come in. And I think I have mentioned one time here that one day when Dr. Sahabi was already in my life for a year or half and asked me to teach at the university, I am teaching some of the studies with him to the students, because he didn't want to do it in English at that time. So he wanted me to start to do it, because I invited him to do it and said, no, you do it, you're a lot younger, you have time to improve, you start teaching it, and just kind of test me and says, yes, you can say what you told me. So I was within a year with him that I start teaching, very unwillingly, actually. But what happened one day, I was walking and I felt this joy of how fortunate I am that this has become my life. And suddenly God opened up a part of my heart and showed me when I was 20, 21, 22, how I desired to learn what I am learning. And he said, you forget, but I don't. So it's good to wish it. It's intention. And I think intention is in all tradition, our intention is very important. I think if we come out of the tradition that Rumi is teaching us and wanting to make it in a contemporary language, our intention is everything. Because none of us are perfect. I for sure don't think in any measure I am perfect. I can get very, disheartened about the winding paths of life. But I try to not get caught in it because I can rely on the knowledge I have accumulated. And somehow my spirit helped me and take my hand and get me out of whatever dilemma whatever trap I fall into. So I think to create the intention and the desire, the book called you, right? The book called me. The desire was there. And Rumi has beautiful verses to just upside down everything we know, the meaning. He is all about meaning. Old Testament, New Testament, Torah, Quran. The stories come together in the domination of meanings, not separation, not segregation. Meanings. My dissertation is about the meanings of how we, can get rid of this human part that is always analyzing. I mean, it's good to analyzing when you're writing your checkbooks and being able to calculate, but it's not good if you wanted to have a deep, delicious, privileged love and life that can touch you and touch others. So I think love, he doesn't tell us what love is in the first book of Masnavi. He just said, jealousy is not love. Comparing is not love. I mean, to compare and feel very grand or feel very small is not love. So it just give you a lot of indication in the stories. Don't do that and that. And, somehow you fell in the well of your being, and then love is right there.
I think that there are some people who may feel that although they may be open to having a teacher, maybe they haven't actually found such a teacher in their lifetime. And so I want to bring up a quote from our almanac this week from an American who has become a Tibetan Buddhist nun. Maybe many of us have heard of her, Pema Chodron. And she says, if we learn to open our hearts, one of your phrases, Fariba, if we learn to open our hearts, anyone, including the people who drive us crazy, can be our teacher.
Yeah. Teachers have their own way to drive us to the edge.
But even people who don't seem at all wise, in some way, when we have these open hearts, can serve as our teacher. So I wonder if people could relate to that and share stories that you may have. If it's not about, some, really, really wise teacher who touched you, who could see to the fiber of your being, as you spoke of it, Fariba, or at least you didn't know that they could. Do you have some other experience of, having a really deep thirst and an open heart, and somebody else served as a teacher to you?
I teach small children, and I feel all the time that, well, this is one of the avenues for me for opening my heart. And so just in the work I get to do with them, I've been getting some of that experience, I would say.
Yes, there's something really winning about those kids that has that ability to just tear your heart wide open. My 3-year-old granddaughter, we're walking through Ross today, Ross store, and she just looks up at me and says, I love you, Nene. Just in the middle of thing. No apparent reason. Oh my gosh, does that teach you a lot about having an open heart? David?
Throughout Fariba's talk, I was thinking, because of a Christian background, about stories about Jesus and how he had his disciples that were really the ones who took his word forward. And I was thinking about the story where he had performed some miracles, and the people were amazed at his miracles. And I think his response to the people was, even greater things shall ye do, that we all have that divine spark within us. And I think the truly great teachers that I've run across in my life have been those who have reminded me that it's all here inside. And at least that's how I heard your talk today, Fariba, and I really appreciate your reminders.
I recently listened to Everything Belongs, Richard Rohr, and it's amazing that he keep repeating that he had to tell people to have permission to trust themselves. I don't think it's good. I mean, I am teaching, but I didn't plan to be a teacher of Rumi. Rumi's, teachings and wisdom. And I have a lot of joy in it, but it saddened me that our religious organizations desire to train people so they're not entirely trusting their inner core of being. And of course, we're not born with manual to know what to do. So we rely on people who have walked the path before us. And hopefully we find someone who is honest about their own lacks and who they are, and also give us enormous space to become who we are. Because if we are the sparks of divine, which we know we are, Jesus told us, all great teachers told us, then we need to actualize. And we need to bring forth the spark we are, the type of energy we are, not with trusting ourselves. That's sad. So stick with the one that says trust yourself and are honest about their own mistakes and their own lacks, because we all have different backgrounds. The painting behind me here is what my teacher painted, is the 7 stages of enlightenment out of the ocean of subconscious. And you can see it because we are not close to it, but love is written in Farsi, like calligraphy, into the water. And this is a phoenix with 7 stages. So the sun of the enlightenment, which he decided to do it like a phoenix, is rising from the ocean of consciousness.
Oh, so beautiful.
Thank you for weaving your experience, which is so sincere and devotional, into the larger picture or the larger reality. I think Sufism is kind of like an ocean that is very inviting and not threatening. So I think you represented the tradition and the practice very well. That would stimulate enthusiasm for people.
Thank you. Means a lot to me, Caroline.
Well, I do want to myself thank Fariba for thinking about how maybe the best way to honor her teacher and her teacher's teacher being Rumi would be by sharing Rumi's story with us. And that entailed her giving up the opportunity to be in person with fellow students that she had studied under this teacher with. So it really was a sacrifice on her part to come and share with us again today. And we really are so grateful to you, Fariba. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being there.
Thank you, Fariba.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um,